A stone circle built 5,000 years ago still catches the first sliver of sunrise on a single day each year. A pyramid's sides align with the cardinal directions within a fraction of a degree. Across the globe, ancient ruins hold a secret, a silent dialogue with the sun, moon, and stars that we are only now beginning to translate. This is not a series of lucky accidents. It is evidence of a forgotten science, a deliberate and precise astronomy carved into stone long before telescopes or written records. By the end of this exploration, you will understand the ingenious methods that made this celestial architecture possible, revealing a shared human genius that connects us across millennia. How did cultures separated by oceans and centuries achieve such accuracy with little more than sticks and stones? What does this universal drive to map the heavens tell us about who we are? The real question is, what do we miss when we underestimate the vision of the past? To understand these stone messages, we must first learn the language they speak. This is the work of archaeoastronomy, a field of study that sounds complex but asks a beautifully simple question. How did people long ago see their place in the cosmos, and how did they build that understanding into the world around them? It is not about proving ancient astronauts or lost super technologies. It is a careful, interdisciplinary science that brings together archaeologists, astronomers, anthropologists, and historians. They piece together clues from excavated artifacts, alignments in standing stones, patterns in myth, and records of the sky as it appeared centuries ago. The goal is to reconstruct a worldview, to see the horizon as an ancient builder saw it, where the rising sun was not just a daily event but a divine signal, where the moon's cycle dictated the rhythm of community life, and where the steady march of stars painted stories onto the night. This rigorous approach separates solid discovery from speculation. It provides the essential lens, the calibrated instrument, through which we can truly appreciate the precision we find. So when we look at a temple doorway framing the winter solstice sunrise, we are not just seeing an architectural feat. We are witnessing a deliberate act of cultural expression, a permanent anchor point in a universe of motion. This foundational perspective turns silent ruins into eloquent testimonies. The gap between their tools and their results is the heart of the mystery. We are talking about a world without steel tape measures, without laser levels, without digital theodolites. The builder's toolkit was profoundly elemental. A straight pole planted in the earth became a sighting device, a gnomon casting a shadow that told time. A weighted string, a plumb bob, established a true vertical line against the chaos of stone. A length of cord, perhaps knotted at regular intervals, served as a measuring tape. A shallow trench filled with water created a perfectly level horizon, a still surface reflecting the sky. These are the humble instruments of the trade. Yet with them, cultures orchestrated stone on a monumental scale, aligning temples and tombs with celestial events to an accuracy we can measure in arcminutes, a tiny fraction of a single degree. It is the equivalent of using a wooden ruler and a piece of string to chart a transatlantic voyage and arriving on the exact beach you intended. So how is this possible? The answer does not lie in a single secret device or lost blueprint. It emerges from a sophisticated interplay of relentless observation, embodied mathematics, and patient, generation-spanning practice. They did not need complex instruments because they turned the world itself into their instrument, using the slow, predictable motion of the heavens as their ultimate calibration tool. Perhaps the most famous conversation between earth and sky is written in the rolling plains of southern England. Stonehenge stands not as a random collection of megaliths, but as a sophisticated astronomical instrument crafted from sarsen stone. Its primary axis, formed by the avenue and the central horseshoe of towering trilithons, points with deliberate precision. At dawn on the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, the sun rises directly over the outlying heel stone, and its light pours down the avenue to bathe the heart of the circle in golden light. Conversely, at dusk on the winter solstice, the sun sets in perfect alignment through the same axis, framed by the great central arch. This was no casual observance. The architecture itself guides the eye and captures the light. The narrow gaps between the uprights of the trilithons act like sighting devices, creating a natural frame for these pivotal solar events. But the builder's vision extended far beyond the sun. 4 smaller stones, known as the station stones, once formed a rectangle around the main circle. The long sides of this rectangle align with the most extreme rising and setting points of the moon during its major standstill, a complex cycle that takes over 18 years to complete. This means Stonehenge encodes not just an annual calendar, but a much longer celestial rhythm. To track such a slow, subtle lunar cycle requires observations maintained across generations, a sustained cultural project passed down through decades. This Neolithic temple demonstrates a staggering depth of astronomical knowledge, a permanent stone diary marking the most important appointments of the sun and moon. While Stonehenge charts the sun and moon, another ancient wonder turned its gaze to the fixed stars. The Great Pyramid of Giza is not merely a tomb, it is a mountain of stone engineered with a celestial purpose. Its base is a near-perfect square, and each of its 4 sides aligns to the cardinal directions north, south, east, and west, with an error of less than 1/10 of a degree. To achieve this with the tools of the Bronze Age is an engineering marvel in itself. But the pyramid's dialogue with the sky extends far beyond its footprint. Built around 2,500 years before the Common Era, its internal passages are precisely angled shafts of stone. The descending passage, which plunges deep into the bedrock beneath the pyramid, is aligned to point directly at the north celestial pole of its time. Because the Earth wobbles on its axis over a cycle of 26,000 years, the North Pole star changes. Back then, it was not Polaris, but a star called Thuban, or Alpha Draconis. The descending passage would have framed this pole star perfectly, a fixed point in the turning night sky. Even more compelling is the theory surrounding the ascending passage, the grand gallery that leads up to the king's chamber. Some researchers propose that this narrow corridor was aligned to point toward the belt of the constellation Orion, specifically the star Al-Nitak, around the time the pyramid was built. Orion was deeply associated with Osiris, the god of rebirth and the afterlife. This suggests the pyramid was more than a monument. It was a kind of stellar clock and a resurrection machine, designed to channel the soul of the departed king directly into the eternal stars. The sheer scale makes the precision almost incomprehensible. We are talking about moving millions of multi-ton limestone blocks to build a structure whose sides are not just straight, but astronomically true. This raises the stakes of our central question to a breathtaking level. How could a society without the wheel, without iron tools, achieve such exactitude on such a colossal canvas? The answer lies not in mythical technologies, but in a mastery of the most fundamental force of all, the unwavering light from the heavens. The ambition to capture a celestial moment in stone found another breathtaking expression far to the west. In the green hills of Ireland's Boyne Valley sits Newgrange, a massive circular mound of earth and stone. Built over 5,000 years ago, it predates both Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid of Giza. From the outside, it appears as a great grass-covered hill, but its true genius is hidden within. A long, narrow passage leads deep into the heart of the mound, ending in a cross-shaped chamber. And above the entrance, a small, carefully constructed opening was sealed for millennia. This is the roof box, a slender window of stone. For most of the year, the interior of this chamber is a place of profound and silent darkness. But for a few precious days around the winter solstice, something extraordinary happens. At dawn, as the sun crests the distant horizon at its lowest, weakest point of the entire year, a narrow beam of golden light begins to pierce the darkness. It streams through that precisely engineered roof box, travels down the 60-foot passageway like a laser, and finally floods the inner chamber with a warm, radiant glow. This illumination lasts for only about 17 minutes before the light retreats, leaving the chamber in darkness once more for another full year. The intentionality of this design is staggering. To achieve this effect, the builders needed an intimate, multi-generational knowledge of the sun's slow journey along the horizon. They had to know exactly where it would rise on the shortest day, and then engineer a structure, an angled light tunnel of stone, to capture that specific, fleeting ray. Newgrange is not a broad alignment like Stonehenge's avenue. It is a precision instrument, a cosmic lightbox engineered to deliver a single, dramatic message of rebirth at the depth of winter. It showcases a completely different architectural solution to the same fundamental human urge to build a permanent marker for a transient celestial event, turning a tomb into a promise of the sun's inevitable return. Across the Atlantic, a different civilization turned sunlight into a living myth. In the heart of the Yucatan Peninsula, the great Maya city of Chichen Itza holds a pyramid known as El Castillo, the Temple of Kukulkan. This stepped structure is a masterpiece of encoded time. Its 4 stairways each have 91 steps, which, combined with the shared platform at the top, totals 365, one for each day of the solar year. But the pyramid's most famous secret reveals itself only twice annually during the spring and autumn equinoxes. As the sun sets on these days of perfect balance between light and dark, a remarkable transformation occurs. The stepped terraces of the pyramid's northwest corner cast a series of triangular shadows onto the balustrade of the main staircase. These interlocking shadows connect, forming a sinuous, undulating body of darkness that appears to slither down the side of the temple. At the base of the staircase, a massive stone serpent's head awaits, and as the sun sinks lower, the shadowy body aligns perfectly with this carved head. For a brief, breathtaking moment, the illusion is complete. A great feathered serpent, Kukulkan, the Maya deity of creation and wisdom, seems to descend from the heavens to touch the earth. This is not a vague alignment or a happy accident. It is a meticulously choreographed light show engineered 500 years before the Common Era. To achieve this effect, the Maya architects needed an extraordinarily precise understanding of the solar year, knowing the exact angle of the sunset on the equinoxes. They then had to translate that celestial geometry into stone, calculating the precise angles of the pyramid's corners and the height of each terrace so that the shadows would fall in exactly the right sequence. This phenomenon represents a profound fusion of science, art, and spirituality. It was public astronomy on a grand scale, a spectacle that reinforced cosmic order, agricultural cycles, and royal authority for all to witness. The descending serpent was a message written in light and shadow, a declaration that the gods themselves walked the architecture of the city and that human knowledge could make that divine presence visible. The serpent's descent at Chichen Itza was a public spectacle, but high in the Andes, another civilization practiced a more intimate and integrated form of celestial observation. At Machu Picchu, the Inca did not merely build monuments to the sky, they wove astronomy directly into the living rock of the mountain itself. The city is a masterclass in horizon astronomy, a practice that used the majestic, jagged peaks of the surrounding cordillera as a permanent, natural observatory. For the Inca, the cosmos was not an abstract dome overhead. It was a dynamic landscape where sacred mountains, called apus, served as the fixed markers against which all celestial motion was measured. The sun, the moon, and the bright stars did not simply rise. They emerged from behind one specific peak and set behind another, their paths tracing a sacred geography across the sky. This turned the entire horizon into a calibrated instrument, with each notch and summit acting as a celestial calendar marker. The architecture of Machu Picchu was designed to frame and interact with this natural clockwork. Windows, doorways, and sighting stones were positioned to capture the first or last light of the sun as it touched a particular mountain on a specific, significant day. This method required no artificial towers or complex machinery, just generations of patient observation and a profound reverence for the mountain environment they inhabited. It was a seamless fusion of culture, cosmology, and geology, where the built world served to highlight the divine order already present in nature. At the heart of this practice stands the Intihuatana stone, one of the most enigmatic and precisely carved features at Machu Picchu. Its name is often translated as the hitching post of the sun. This is not a passive altar, but a sophisticated astronomical device. The stone itself is a single granite block sculpted into a complex, multi-angled form, culminating in a short, upright pillar. This pillar acts as a gnomon, the pointer of a sundial, but this was no simple timepiece for telling the hour of the day. The flat platform upon which the Intihuatana rests is carefully leveled, and researchers have noted subtle carvings and grooves on its surface. On the days of the equinoxes, the sun stands directly overhead at noon at this latitude, and the gnomon casts no shadow at all. It is a moment of perfect verticality, a symbolic capture of the sun. During the solstices, however, the sun's path is at its furthest north or south. The shadow cast by the gnomon then falls along specific, pre-marked lines on the stone's base, indicating the sun's extreme position. By observing where the tip of the shadow touched these carved indicators, Inca priests could determine the exact date of these pivotal solar events with remarkable accuracy. The Intihuatana was likely used in conjunction with other carved stones and architectural features throughout the city, creating a network of aligned observation points. This allowed them to cross-reference sightings, verifying the sun's position against both the artificial markers of their stonework and the natural markers of the distant peaks. It was a system of checks and balances carved into the landscape. This holistic approach reveals a fundamental truth about how many ancient cultures viewed their world. For the Inca and for others we have explored, there was no separation between the celestial and the terrestrial, between science and spirituality, or between architecture and the environment. The mountain was not just a backdrop, it was an active participant in the cosmic drama. A temple doorway framing a solstice sunrise was not just a pretty view, it was a sacred alignment that reaffirmed the covenant between the people and their gods. The shadow creeping along a carved line was not just a measurement, it was the movement of a deity made visible. This integrated perspective allowed them to achieve precision not by overcoming nature with technology, but by listening to it with profound attention. They used the world itself as their primary tool, calibrating their constructions to the slow, grand cycles that were already in motion. The result is a legacy that feels both ancient and deeply resonant. It challenges our modern tendency to compartmentalize knowledge. It suggests that true understanding might come not from building taller instruments to see farther away, but from looking more carefully at the relationship between where we stand and the heavens that turn above us. This leads us to a pivotal and practical question, one that bridges all these diverse cultures. If they did not have our tools, what was the fundamental, step-by-step process that allowed a group of people with simple materials to translate a celestial event into a permanent, immovable stone alignment? But what if the celestial map was not carved into a mountain or a pyramid, but could be held in your hands? In the year 1999, two treasure hunters working illegally in a forest in central Germany unearthed a bronze disc about the size of a large dinner plate. This object, now known as the Nebra Sky Disc, is considered by many to be the oldest known realistic depiction of the cosmos anywhere in the world. Dated to around 1600 years before the Common Era, it predates our previous examples by centuries and offers a completely different kind of evidence. Here was no monumental alignment but a portable, personal artifact of celestial knowledge. The disc is a stunning work of Bronze Age artistry and science. Against a background once shimmering with a blue-green patina, symbols of gold leaf are arranged. A large circle and a crescent shape are widely interpreted as representing the sun and a crescent moon. A cluster of 7 small dots perfectly matches the pattern of the Pleiades star cluster, a significant marker in ancient calendars worldwide, and most tellingly, along the disk's edges are 2 golden arcs. Their precise angular span, 82 degrees, corresponds almost exactly to the angle between the sunrise points at the summer and winter solstices, as viewed from that location in Germany. This is not a generic picture of the sky, it is a specific, calibrated instrument. The Nebra Sky Disc shatters the notion that sophisticated astronomy required giant, permanent structures. This was a blueprint, a conceptual model made of metal. It could have been used by a community's astronomer or priest as a teaching tool to demonstrate the relationships between celestial bodies to apprentices. More practically, it could have served as a reference device for planning. Before a community committed to moving massive stones to mark a solstice sunrise, they could have used the disc to visualize the necessary alignment, to understand where on the horizon the sun needed to rise. The arcs on the disc provided a measurable template, a standard against which observations could be checked. It represents the vital link between abstract knowledge and physical construction. The disc is proof that the cosmos was first mapped in the mind, and that this mental model was precise enough to be translated into both handheld metal and monumental stone. It suggests a shared, transferable language of the sky that could travel, influencing practices across regions. This portable planetarium forces us to reconsider the very nature of ancient science. The knowledge was not locked into the architecture, it was carried by people. The celestial patterns they chased were not random, but the deep, predictable rhythms of the cosmos itself. At the heart of nearly every culture's sky watching was the solar cycle, the sun's annual journey along the horizon. Picture the sunrise point moving like a pendulum over the course of a year. It travels northward each day after the winter solstice, the shortest day, reaching its farthest northern point at the summer solstice, the longest day. Then it reverses, swinging south again. The 2 equinoxes in spring and autumn are the balanced moments in between, when day and night are of equal length and the sun rises due east and sets due west. These 4 anchor points, the 2 solstices and 2 equinoxes, form the fundamental pillars of the solar year. They are relatively straightforward to observe with patience, requiring only a fixed observation point and a marker, like a stone or a notch in a distant hill, to track the sunrise or sunset position over many years. Once identified, these turning points became the cornerstones of agricultural calendars, religious festivals, and social order. They told people when to plant, when to harvest, when to celebrate renewal, and when to prepare for the lean months. This is the solar language we see so clearly at Newgrange, at Chichen Itza, and in the arcs of the Nebra Sky Disc. But the moon presented a far more complex puzzle. Its cycles are layered, intricate, and less obvious to the casual observer. While the sun's yearly path is consistent, the moon's journey is a wobbling dance superimposed on the solar track. The moon also has rising and setting points that shift, but they do so within a much wider band across the sky, and they follow a longer, more subtle rhythm. The key cycle here is known as the lunar standstill, a complete swing of the moon's extreme positions. Imagine the moon's path slowly widening and narrowing over a period of about 18.6 years. At the peak of this cycle, at the major standstill, the moon rises and sets at its most northerly and southerly points, far beyond where the sun ever travels. Then, over the next 9.3 years, it retreats to a minor standstill with much more modest extremes. To recognize this pattern, to even perceive that such a long, slow cycle existed, required something extraordinary, generational continuity in observation. A single person, even a wise elder, could not witness a full cycle in their lifetime. This means knowledge had to be meticulously recorded and passed down, likely through oral tradition, ceremony, and the careful placement of permanent markers. The builders of Stonehenge, with their rectangle of station stones aligned to the lunar standstill, demonstrate that they did exactly that. They committed to a project of observation that spanned decades, perhaps even centuries, treating the lunar rhythm with the same reverence as the solar one. Tracking the moon was not about practicality in the way the sun was for farming. It was a deeper, more philosophical pursuit. It represented a mastery of time itself, an understanding that the cosmos operated on multiple, interlocking clocks. The solar cycle gave them the year, the lunar cycle gave them the month, and hinted at a grander, generational time scale. By marking both, these ancient astronomers were building a complete temporal map, embedding into their architecture a multi-layered understanding of cosmic order. This patient, long-term dedication to watching the sky is perhaps their greatest achievement, a testament to a culture's commitment to seeing beyond the immediate, to leaving a legacy of knowledge in stone for those who would come long after. The simplest tools often reveal the deepest truths. A straight pole planted firmly in the ground, a gnomon, becomes the first and most powerful instrument in the ancient astronomer's toolkit. Its operation requires no moving parts, only sunlight and patience. As the sun arcs across the sky, the gnomon's shadow sweeps across the ground, a silent, sweeping hand on a sundial. But it is the slow, seasonal changes in that shadow that hold the key to the solar year. By marking the tip of the shadow at the same time each day, say at local noon when the sun is highest, a pattern emerges. Over the months, the shadow's length grows and shrinks. In summer, when the sun is high, the noon shadow is short. In winter, with the sun low on the horizon, the shadow stretches long. The two turning points of the year, the solstices, are marked by the extremes. The summer solstice gives the shortest noon shadow, the winter solstice the longest. Midway between these 2 points, on the days of the equinox, something equally significant occurs. On those 2 days of balance, the shadow's path traces a perfectly straight line running east to west. A simple gnomon, observed with daily discipline, could therefore pinpoint the 4 cardinal dates of the solar year with remarkable precision. This was not a theoretical exercise. It was a practical, repeatable experiment happening in real time, grounded in the earth and written in light. But how do you turn this ephemeral shadow play into a permanent, communal record? The scaling up is both logical and brilliant. Once the critical shadow in points for the solstices and equinoxes were identified over several cycles, the ancient builders could replace temporary marks in the dirt with something enduring. They would set stones at the precise spots where the shadow's tip fell at noon on the solstices. Another stone could mark the line of the equinox shadow. Over time, a simple array of stones around a central gnomon, or perhaps a tall, carved obelisk, would transform a patch of ground into a fixed solar observatory. This stone calendar required no further calculation. Each year, as the noon shadow just touched the summer solstice stone, the community knew the longest day had arrived. When it reached the winter stone, the turn back toward light was confirmed. This method demystifies the monumental alignments we see elsewhere. The grand axis of Stonehenge, the descending serpent at Chichen Itza, they all began with this fundamental principle, observing a shadow's journey and then committing its limits to stone. It is a method of breathtaking elegance, turning the sun itself into both the architect and the proof of the design. The Gnomon's shadow is a private conversation between a single point and the sun. But what if you could turn the entire horizon into a communal calendar, visible to all? This is the principle of horizon astronomy, a method so elegantly simple it feels like pure genius. Instead of watching a shadow move on the ground, you watch the celestial body itself move against a fixed backdrop of the world. An observer, perhaps a priest or a designated sky watcher, would return to the same exact spot day after day, year after year. This spot, marked by a stone seat, a carved platform, or a special notch in a wall, became the sacred, unmoving point of reference. From this vantage, they would watch where the sun, moon, or a bright star first peeked over the eastern hills at dawn, or where it finally vanished into the western landscape at dusk. The key was to identify permanent landmarks on that distant skyline, a distinctive mountain peak, a solitary tree on a ridge, a cleft between two hills, or even a specially placed cairn of stones built by human hands. Over the cycles, they would note that on the summer solstice, the sun rose directly over that specific, distant notch. 6 months later, at the winter solstice, it would rise far to the south, aligned with a completely different peak. The space between these two extreme points became a giant, natural measuring scale etched across the horizon. This method leveraged the landscape itself as a monumental, pre-existing instrument. It required no complex engineering, just meticulous, patient observation and a deep, intimate knowledge of the local terrain. The Inca at Machu Picchu perfected this, using the majestic Apu Mountains as their celestial markers. But this technique was universal. Even at Stonehenge, before the great stones were erected, the builders likely used the natural horizon. The famous heel stone, which now marks the summer solstice sunrise, may have first been chosen because it stood as a solitary, dark silhouette against the bright dawn sky from a specific viewing point within the landscape. By marking that alignment with a stone, they fossilized the observation, turning a transient relationship between sun and land into a permanent, communal truth. A horizon calendar is democratic astronomy. It turns the sky into a story written across the land, a story anyone in the community could learn to read by learning the names and meanings of the distant hills. While the horizon provided a grand scale for alignment, the ground beneath their feet presented a more immediate and practical challenge. How do you create a perfectly level foundation for a pyramid that will rise hundreds of feet, or lay out a straight line of stones that must run true for a quarter of a mile across uneven terrain? The solution they found was as simple as it was brilliant, and it flowed from the most basic element of life. Water always finds its own level. This fundamental principle of physics became one of the most powerful tools in the ancient engineer's kit. By digging a shallow trench around the intended construction site and filling it with water, they created a giant, continuous spirit level. They could then measure down from the calm surface of the water at any point to establish a uniform reference plane across the entire area. No matter how bumpy or sloped the ground was, every foundation stone could be set to the exact same height relative to that still water line. This method was used from the plains of Mesopotamia to the plateaus of Mesoamerica, allowing for the impossibly flat bases we see in structures like the Great Pyramid. But water's utility went far beyond just creating a level floor. It could also be used to trace perfectly straight lines over vast distances. Imagine a long, narrow channel dug into the earth and filled with water. By sighting along its calm, reflective surface, builders could establish a dead straight visual axis, an unbroken line of sight that ignored minor dips and rises in the land. This was the precursor to the modern surveyor's transit, a liquid guide for aligning the long avenues leading to temples or the precise edges of monumental plazas. And water's reflective property opened a third, even more celestial application. A still pool at night becomes a mirror to the heavens. By observing a star not just in the sky, but simultaneously in its reflection on the water's surface, an observer could create a perfect vertical plumb line with their eyesight. They could line up the real star with its mirrored twin, and that sight line would point directly to the celestial pole, the pivot point around which the night sky turns. This gave them a true north-south axis with astonishing accuracy, a method far more precise than simply watching a star rise and set. So a humble trench of water solved three problems at once. It leveled the Earth, it drew straight lines across it, and it connected that Earth directly to the orderly motion of the cosmos. It was a tool that transformed a chaotic landscape into a calibrated instrument, ready to receive the weight of history. A length of rope is more than a tool for tying. It is a portable, flexible ruler capable of defining the very shape of civilization. While water provided level and reflection, it was the simple cord that translated celestial alignments and geometric perfection onto the raw earth. Across cultures, from the river valleys of Egypt to the high Andes, the stretched rope was the essential instrument for turning vision into architecture. The principle is beautifully direct. To create a perfectly straight line for a wall or an avenue, you would drive two stakes into the ground at the desired endpoints. Then, a cord soaked in pigment or simply pulled taut between them would give builders an unambiguous guide to follow, a literal line in the sand. But the true geometric power of the rope was unlocked when you used it not just to mark a line, but to generate perfect shapes. Imagine needing to lay out the right-angled corner of a massive temple platform. The solution was the knotted cord, a physical embodiment of mathematical truth. A length of rope would be divided by knots into 12 equal segments. By having one person hold the knot at the third segment, a second hold the knot at the seventh, and a third pull the rope taut from the ends, they would instantly form a triangle with sides of 3, 4, and 5 units. This is the famous 3-4-5 triangle, a set of numbers that always produces a perfect right angle between the 3 and 4 unit sides. This simple technique, known for millennia, allowed teams of workers with no written mathematics to establish perfectly square corners for foundations of any scale. They were doing practical geometry with their hands, feeling the truth of the Pythagorean theorem through tension and touch long before it was ever formalized with pen and paper. The rope could also draw the most sacred of shapes, the circle. A central peg with a cord tied to it became a giant compass. As a builder walked the circumference, keeping the cord taut, they would scratch a perfect circle into the earth. This is almost certainly how the vast, circular banks and arrays of posts at early sites like Stonehenge were first drafted onto the landscape. The radius could be adjusted, concentric circles could be drawn, and the geometry of the heavens could be mirrored on the ground. This method connects directly to the Inca, masters of fiber and knot. While their famous quipu cords are primarily understood as complex recording devices for census data and narratives, the underlying principle is the same: information encoded in the physical manipulation of cord. It is not a stretch to think that the same culture that recorded its history in knots also used measured cords to plan the precise trapezoidal doorways and interlocking stonework of their cities. The rope was a democratic technology. It required no special material, just knowledge. It transformed a group of laborers into surveyors, allowing them to replicate perfect geometric relationships across vast construction sites. With a bundle of ropes and a set of stakes, they could transfer the angles observed in the sky, the proportions dictated by tradition, and the symmetry demanded by cosmology directly onto the land, one taut line at a time. This humble tool was the final, critical link between observation and monument, the means by which the grand, abstract patterns of the cosmos were given permanent, earthly form. The stars offered a more demanding but ultimately more stable kind of truth. Unlike the sun and moon, whose paths are tied to the horizon, certain stars hold a fixed position in the turning sky. These are the circumpolar stars, the ones that never rise or set from a given latitude. They simply wheel around a central pivot point, the celestial pole, night after night, year after year. For an ancient astronomer, these constant sentinels became the ultimate reference. By identifying the star that made the smallest circle around that pivot point, they could pinpoint true north with extraordinary precision. This was not a single star for all time, however. The Earth wobbles on its axis over a vast cycle of 26,000 years, a slow drift called precession. This means the position of the celestial pole shifts gradually against the backdrop of stars. The star we call Polaris is our current North Star, but it has not always held that honor. 4,500 years ago, when the Great Pyramid was being built, the pole star was Theban, a star in the constellation Draco. The pyramid's builders likely used Theban's unwavering circuit to establish the near-perfect north-south alignment of its sides. To do this, they would have employed a beautifully simple observational technique. They could watch a bright circumpolar star like Theban throughout the long night. They would mark its highest point in the sky and its lowest point directly opposite. The midpoint between those two extremes would point directly to the celestial pole, the true axis of the sky. This method turned time into a compass, using the star's own motion to reveal a fixed direction. But what about stars that do rise and set? Aligning a structure to one of these required a different, even more patient strategy. Imagine choosing a bright, prominent star like Sirius or Orion's belt. Over the course of a year, an observer would note the exact point on the eastern horizon where it first appeared at dawn, and the exact point on the western horizon where it finally vanished at dusk. These 2 points would be far apart. The crucial step was to find the midpoint between them. By bisecting the arc between the stars' rising and setting positions, the astronomers could determine a true east-west line. Once you have a perfect east-west axis, finding north and south is straightforward. You simply create a line perpendicular to it. This bisection method is a masterpiece of slow, cumulative science. It could not be done in one night or even one season. It required careful records kept over many years to account for the star's subtle annual drift. The reward for this generational patience was an alignment of staggering accuracy, one locked to the timeless geometry of the celestial sphere rather than the shifting horizon. It suggests that some of the most enduring orientations we find in ancient temples and tombs may have been born from this star-bisecting practice, a silent tribute to observers who spent lifetimes connecting dots in the night, translating the slow dance of the heavens into the immutable language of stone. The precise angle of a shadow or the exact notch for a sunrise was not discovered in a single lifetime. These alignments represent the slow, patient work of generations, a cumulative science passed down like a sacred heirloom. This is the cultural engine that made the celestial architecture possible, a sustained, institutionalized practice of watching and remembering. At the heart of this was a dedicated class of observers, whether priests, elders, or specialized scholars, whose primary role was to maintain an unbroken dialogue with the sky. Their work was not a hobby, it was a vital societal function, as crucial as farming or governance, for it ordered time itself. They would have returned to the same observation platform year after year, decade after decade, noting the subtle drift of a star's rising point or the slow creep of a solstice shadow. Their individual lives were brief, but their collective record became immortal. This is where artifacts like the Nebra Sky Disc transform from beautiful objects into profound tools of knowledge transfer. The disc was not just a map, it was a teaching device and a standardized reference. A master astronomer could use it to instruct an apprentice, pointing to the golden arcs and saying, "This is the span the sun travels between the long and short days." When that apprentice eventually took his place at the observation point, he carried that mental model with him, ensuring the tradition's continuity with fidelity. In Mesoamerica, this record-keeping reached an astonishing level of sophistication with the Maya codices. These bark paper books, though few survived the passage of time, were filled with complex calendrical calculations, tracking not just solar years but the synodic cycles of Venus and intricate lunar calendars. They were the living databases of their astronomy, allowing a priest to look backward through centuries of recorded cycles to predict future celestial events with remarkable accuracy. This long-term dedication required a culture that valued this knowledge enough to support it, to feed the observers, and to honor their findings in law, ritual, and monumental construction. The stone circle or pyramid was the final, permanent expression of this generational project, the ultimate backup of the data. It was a society's way of saying, we have watched for 100 years, and this is the truth we found, so we will carve it into the earth where it cannot be lost. This perspective shifts our understanding from marveling at a single moment of alignment to respecting a centuries-long project of communal attention. It frames these sites not as endpoints, but as milestones in a relentless collective pursuit of cosmic order. The true precision lies not in the stone alone, but in the unwavering human commitment to watching the sky. But the translation of star maps into stone is not always a clear text. One of the most captivating and fiercely debated theories in this field centers on the Giza Plateau and the constellation of Orion. The proposal, known as the Orion correlation theory, suggests that the three great pyramids of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure are not randomly placed. Instead, they are argued to be a deliberate, scaled-down reflection of the three stars that form Orion's belt. The evidence presented is visually striking. Proponents point out that the two larger pyramids, Khufu and Khafre, align diagonally in a way that mirrors the two brighter stars of the belt, Al-Nitak and Al-Nilam. The third, slightly offset and smaller pyramid of Menkaure corresponds to the third, dimmer star, Mintaka. They further note that the relative brightness of the stars seems to match the relative sizes of the pyramids. To complete the celestial picture, the theory proposes that the Nile River itself was intended to represent the Milky Way, the great cosmic river in the sky from which Orion appears to emerge. This interpretation weaves a powerful narrative, framing the entire Giza necropolis as a vast astral blueprint, a resurrection machine designed to eternally link the souls of the pharaohs with the realm of the gods. It is a story that resonates deeply, offering a singular, elegant explanation for the site's monumental layout. However, mainstream archaeology and astronomy raise significant counterarguments that highlight the complexities of such interpretations. The first major challenge is the slow wobble of Earth's axis, the precession we discussed earlier. The position of Orion's belt relative to the horizon has shifted noticeably over the 4,500 years since the pyramids were built. While the correlation appears close for the modern era, recalculating the precise positions for that ancient time shows a less perfect match, with the angles between the stars not aligning as neatly with the pyramid layout as first claimed. The second issue is topographic. The Giza Plateau is not a blank, flat canvas. The placement of the pyramids was heavily constrained by the bedrock geology, the need for stable foundations, and the existing royal cemetery layout. The southernmost pyramid, Menkaure's, is offset partly because the ground to the south drops away sharply. When you adjust for these very practical, earthly considerations, the astronomical correlation becomes less precise. Furthermore, Egyptologists point to a wealth of textual and archaeological evidence from the period that emphasizes the sun god Ra and the circumpolar, imperishable stars as the primary celestial targets for the king's afterlife journey, with less emphasis on Orion specifically. This case study is not about proving one side right or wrong. It serves a more important purpose. It demonstrates the essential practice of critical thinking within archaeoastronomy. A compelling pattern emerges, but then it must be rigorously tested against the hard facts of precession. against the unyielding reality of the local landscape and against the cultural context provided by other forms of evidence. Sometimes the most beautiful cosmic story must yield to a more complicated, but perhaps more human, truth. The plateau may not be a perfect star chart, but the very existence of this debate proves how powerfully these stones still pull our gaze upward, challenging us to find the balance between celestial inspiration and earthly execution. High on a sun-baked butte in Chaco Canyon, a secret was written in light and shadow. On the sheer cliff face of Fajota Butte, the ancestral Pueblones carved two large, elegant spirals into the rock. For most of the year, they sit in silent obscurity, but on key days, a precise and dramatic transformation occurs. The mechanism is astonishingly delicate. Three massive, wedge-shaped stone slabs, each taller than a person, have fallen from the cliff above and now lean against the rock face just in front of the petroglyphs. They did not fall randomly. Their placement creates two narrow slits between them, channels no wider than a hand. At midday around the summer solstice, a brilliant shaft of sunlight pierces through the upper slit. It does not cast a simple circle of light. As it passes across the carved spiral, the beam compresses into a distinct, dagger-shaped sliver that plunges directly through the center of the larger spiral. At the winter solstice, two daggers of light bracket the same spiral, and during the equinoxes, a single dagger of light perfectly bisects the smaller, adjacent spiral. This is the sun dagger, a phenomenon of such specific geometry that it feels undeniably deliberate. The alignment is not a broad sunrise marker across a distant horizon. It is a focused high noon event, a laser-like interaction between fixed stone and moving sun, playing out on a vertical canvas. The effect lasts only for a handful of minutes, a fleeting but perfectly timed celestial performance enacted once a year. It represents a shift from horizon astronomy to aperture astronomy, using the world itself as a lens to project a readable signal. This suggests an intimate, localized knowledge, a calendar meant not for a whole community gathered in a plaza, but perhaps for a select few who understood its code. The precision is what fuels a lasting debate among researchers. Is the sun dagger a meticulously engineered calendar, or a profoundly fortunate natural arrangement that ancient observers discovered and then marked? The argument for intentional design is powerful. The three slabs are enormous, but their positions relative to the carvings and the sun's path seem too perfect to be mere chance. Could the ancestral Pueblones have somehow adjusted these multi-ton rocks, inching them into the exact orientation needed to create those narrow, light-shaping slits? Did they first observe a crude version of the effect and then refine it, perhaps by carving the spirals precisely where the light daggers fell? If so, it is a masterpiece of reverse engineering nature. The opposing view holds that the slabs fell naturally into a configuration that just happened to create the slits. The ancestral Pueblones, being consummate sky watchers, would have noticed this rare alignment. They then added the spiral petroglyphs at the exact points of illumination, effectively annotating a celestial accident, turning a natural curiosity into a cultural tool. This perspective sees them not as the engineers of the effect, but as its brilliant interpreters. This debate illuminates a crucial gray area in archaeoastronomy, the fine line between a discovered alignment and an engineered one. In many ancient sites, the truth likely lies in that middle ground. A culture deeply attuned to the sky would see potential in the landscape. A peculiar rock formation that caught the equinox light would become sacred, and they might enhance it with carvings or add a few stones to sharpen the signal. The sun dagger, whether fully built or brilliantly adopted, stands as a testament to that process of collaboration with the environment. It shows a dialogue with the cosmos where the distinction between finding and making blurs into irrelevance. The lasting truth is that someone, centuries ago, paid such close attention that they could read a complex solar calendar in a sliver of light on a cliff wall. and they ensured that message would endure. That slow wobble of Earth's axis is not just a curiosity, it is the ultimate timekeeper and the final, irrefutable witness to ancient intent. This gradual drift, called the precession of the equinoxes, completes one full cycle every 26,000 years. Think of a spinning top that begins to trace a slow, wide circle as it rotates, its tilt shifting direction over time. Earth does the same. Our planet's north pole does not point permanently at Polaris. Over centuries, it slowly traces a circle among the stars. This means the entire backdrop of the night sky, the coordinates of every sunrise and sunset, is in constant glacial motion. A star that rose directly over a sacred mountain peak 3,000 years ago now appears a finger's width away. The winter solstice sunrise that once flooded a temple doorway now strikes the edge of the frame. This cosmic drift is the ultimate test for any claimed astronomical alignment. It provides a scientific checkpoint that separates coincidence from design. If a temple doorway is aligned to today's equinox sunrise, it could be luck. But if we rewind the sky using astronomical software, calculating the precise position of celestial bodies 2,000 or 4,000 years ago, and find that the alignment snaps into perfect, breathtaking accuracy for that specific era, the case for intentionality becomes overwhelming. This is how we verify the vision of the builders. The slight misalignments we see today are not errors, they are proof of the passage of time itself, a built-in timestamp confirming the monument's true age and purpose. Precession forces us to see these sites not as static museums, but as moments frozen in a moving cosmos. It allows us to stand where the ancient astronomers stood, to see the sky as they saw it, and to witness the exact celestial event they engineered their stones to capture. This reverse engineering of the past sky is a powerful key, unlocking the original meaning behind the alignment and confirming that the precision we admire was indeed placed there by human hands, aimed at a heaven that has since slowly turned away. The leap from a shadow on the ground to a mountain of aligned stone is the ultimate act of translation. It is one thing to know where the sun will rise on the solstice. It is another to build a monument that will capture that light for millennia. This translation required a process, a systematic method to scale up a moment of celestial observation into a permanent architectural fact. It began not with stone, but with wood and string. The first step was to establish the sacred axis. At the chosen site, the astronomers would set a primary sighting pole, the master gnomon. Over years, they would mark the extreme points of its shadow at the solstices, or the precise spots on the horizon where the sun rose on those pivotal days. Once these celestial coordinates were confirmed, they would drive a second pole into the ground at the exact endpoint of the desired alignment, perhaps where the first ray of solstice light should strike. A taut cord stretched between these two poles now defined the primary axis of the entire future structure, a straight line from the observing point to the celestial target. This cord was the first draft of the blueprint. With the primary axis as their backbone, the builders could now project the full geometry of the monument. Using the knotted rope technique, they would create perfect right angles off the main line to lay out the corners of a square temple platform or the sides of a pyramid. To draw a vast circle for a henge, they would use a central peg with a long cord as a giant compass, scratching the massive circumference into the earth. Every key point, every post hole for a standing stone, every corner of a foundation was first located by these measured cords, transforming the abstract alignment into a physical grid on the landscape. But a layout on uneven ground is only a plan. The true challenge was translating that two-dimensional grid into a three-dimensional structure that remained perfectly level and true over decades of construction. This is where the water trench became indispensable. Before a single foundation stone was laid, workers would dig a network of shallow channels around the site and fill them with water. The calm surface provided an unerring reference plane across the entire area. By measuring down from this liquid level at countless points, they could ensure that every section of the foundation, even across dips and rises in the bedrock, started from the same exact height. As walls began to rise, they used simpler versions of this tool, perhaps a length of hollow reed filled with water, to check that each course of stone was perfectly horizontal. Accuracy was maintained through relentless repetition and cross-checking. The original sighting poles would likely have been left in place or replaced with permanent stone markers for the duration of the build. As the structure grew, obscuring the original horizon, builders could continually sight back along the primary axis chords to verify they had not drifted. The process was one of constant calibration, a dialogue between the emerging stonework and the remembered sky. This was not a project of years but of generations. The master plan, encoded in chord lengths, not patterns, and the memory of the original alignment, had to be passed down. A new generation of builders inherited not just unfinished stone, but a sacred geometrical recipe that they were duty-bound to complete with fidelity. The monument we see today is the culmination of that patient, cumulative execution, a small observation made immortal through scale, discipline, and a profound trust in the language of measurement. The immense effort of aligning stone to sky was never just a technical exercise. It was driven by a constellation of human needs, each one powerful enough to motivate generations of labor. The most immediate and practical reason was survival itself. In a world without printed calendars or weather apps, the sun and stars were the only reliable guides for the agricultural cycle. Knowing the exact day of the winter solstice told a community that the sun's strength would return, that it was time to prepare the fields. The spring equinox signaled the planting window, while the autumn equinox marked the harvest and the coming lean month. A stone that caught the solstice sunrise was not merely a marker, it was a civic alarm clock, a public utility carved in granite that ensured the entire society moved in rhythm with the seasons. A mistake in this calendar could mean failed crops and hardship, so precision was not an abstract ideal, it was a matter of life. This celestial timekeeping naturally bled into the sacred. Religious ceremonies, festivals honoring gods of sun, rain, and earth, needed to be performed at the cosmically correct moment to be effective. A ceremony for fertility held a week too early or late was thought to be useless or even offensive to the deities. The temple aligned to the equinox became the stage for this divine interaction, guaranteeing the ritual's potency by synchronizing it with the heavens. The authority to declare these dates, to interpret the stone's silent message, conferred immense power. This leads to the third motivation: political control. A ruler or priestly class who could predict the solstice or an eclipse was seen as having a direct line to the cosmos. They could claim, "We do not just represent the gods, we converse with them, and we have built their house to prove it." The monumental scale of the architecture served as permanent propaganda, a physical demonstration of their unique ability to mediate between the earthly and celestial realms. It solidified social hierarchy, justifying their rule by framing it as a necessary part of the cosmic order. But beneath the practical, the ceremonial, and the political lay the deepest motivation of all, a profound cosmological belief. For many ancient cultures, the universe was a single, interconnected entity. The orderly motion of the stars was the highest expression of harmony. Chaos on earth, in society, or in the soul was a deviation from this celestial perfection. Therefore, to build a city, a temple, or a tomb in precise alignment with the heavens was an act of cosmic healing. It was a way to tether the messy, unpredictable human world to the flawless, eternal rhythms above. By mirroring celestial order in their architecture, they were participating in the maintenance of the universe itself, ensuring stability, balance, and continuity. The pyramid facing true north was not just an engineering feat, it was a statement of philosophical alignment. The effort was worthwhile because it was about more than telling time or consolidating power. It was about weaving human existence into the very fabric of the cosmos, creating a sacred space where heaven and earth met, and where the community found its place within an infinite, meaningful whole. Yet this conversation between ancient stones and the modern sky is not without its skeptics. With countless structures scattered across millennia, could some of these alignments simply be chance? It is a fair and necessary question. If you have enough buildings, some will, by random probability, point toward a significant sunrise or star. So how do we separate a lucky accident from a deliberate design? Scholars have developed a rigorous set of criteria to weigh the evidence, moving beyond a single, suggestive line. The first and strongest indicator is redundancy. A single alignment might be coincidence, but a site that encodes multiple, independent celestial relationships almost certainly is not. Think of Stonehenge again. It is not just one axis for the summer solstice sunrise. It has the winter solstice sunset along the same line, the lunar standstill markers in the station stones, and possible stellar alignments. This layering of astronomical meaning within one complex creates a web of intent that random chance cannot easily explain. The second criterion is cultural significance. Did the alignment point to a celestial body that truly mattered to that society? An Egyptian temple aligned to Sirius, whose heliacal rising signaled the Nile's flood, carries profound meaning. A temple aligned to a random, faint star with no known cultural role is far less convincing. The stars and events they chose to highlight must resonate with what we know of their myths, their gods, and their practical needs from other sources like texts or artifacts. The third clue is integration. Was the astronomical function woven into the very art and ritual of the structure? The sun dagger at Chaco Canyon is not just a rock that catches light. It is a spiral petroglyph that the light dagger specifically bisects. The descending serpent at Chichen Itza requires the carved stone head at the base of the pyramid to complete the illusion. When the celestial effect is part of a larger artistic or ceremonial statement, intention becomes clear. Finally, there is the presence of specialized architectural features that serve no other obvious purpose than astronomy. The roof box at Newgrange is a precise, engineered aperture. The narrow, angled shafts within the Great Pyramid point to specific regions of the sky. The carved sighting grooves on an Inca stone. These are not generic architectural elements. They are tools made of stone, designed to filter, channel, or frame celestial light in a specific way. By applying this multi-layered filter, the picture comes into sharper focus. We move from seeing a pattern to understanding a purpose, from a line on a map to a message left in the landscape, waiting for the right day and the right light to speak. The modern quest to verify these celestial conversations is a fascinating blend of high technology and old-fashioned fieldwork. Today's archaeoastronomer might begin their investigation not in a trench, but at a computer screen using satellite imagery and LIDAR scans. LIDAR, which stands for Light Detection and Ranging, is a revolutionary tool. It uses laser pulses fired from an aircraft to map the ground surface with incredible precision, even penetrating dense forest canopy to reveal the subtle contours of ancient plazas, mounds, and stone rows invisible from the ground. This digital landscape becomes the first layer of the puzzle. With the site's exact coordinates and topography mapped, researchers then employ sophisticated three-dimensional modeling software. They can reconstruct the site as it likely appeared centuries ago, accounting for erosion or fallen stones. But the true magic happens when they plug in astronomical data. This software can rewind the sky by inputting the precise latitude, longitude, and estimated date of construction. They can simulate the exact positions of the sun, moon, and stars on any given day in the distant past. They can ask the computer to show them the sunrise point on the summer solstice in the year 1500 before the Common Era, as viewed from a specific stone within the circle. This allows them to test alignment hypotheses with mathematical rigor, separating compelling visual patterns from statistically significant results. It is a powerful form of digital time travel, providing a testable model before a single researcher sets foot on the site. Yet for all its power, the simulation is only a hypothesis. It must be tested against the physical reality of the place. This is where traditional survey methods return with renewed importance. Teams will travel to the site with modern theodolites and total stations, instruments that measure horizontal and vertical angles with extreme accuracy. They will carefully record the exact orientation of a wall, the sightline through a doorway, or the alignment of a series of standing stones. They will also meticulously survey the local horizon, noting every dip and peak, because a distant mountain that appears insignificant today might have been the critical celestial marker for the builders. The modern process is a dialogue between the digital and the tangible. The computer model suggests where to look, and the field measurements confirm or refine what is actually there. This methodology has brought clarity to many long-standing debates. It has confirmed the intentionality of some alignments beyond reasonable doubt, such as the winter solstice phenomenon at Newgrange. In other cases, it has gently corrected earlier enthusiasm, showing that a proposed stellar alignment, while close, falls outside the margin of error when precession is accounted for. This rigorous, multi-pronged approach honors the ancient scientists by subjecting their work to the finest tools of our own era. It transforms awe into understanding, allowing us to not just wonder at a stone that catches the light, but to comprehend the exact celestial mechanics that made that moment inevitable in the eyes of its builders. Some ancient sites whisper their secrets clearly, while others speak in riddles we are still struggling to translate. The Carnac stone rows in Brittany, France, are a perfect example of an enigma carved into the landscape. Stretching for miles across the countryside, over 3,000 massive standing stones are arranged in long, parallel lines. From the ground, the sheer scale is overwhelming, a megalithic forest of granite. The traditional explanation has often leaned toward the ceremonial or funerary, with the lines perhaps marking processional paths, but when viewed from above, a compelling astronomical possibility emerges. Several researchers have noted that the primary axis of the grandest alignments points directly toward the sunrise on the summer solstice, yet the complexity does not end there. Some propose that specific gaps and sightlines within the dense array of stones could have been used to track the moon's more complex cycle, its major standstill. The problem is the sheer number of stones. With so many monoliths, the law of probability suggests some will align with celestial events purely by chance. Distinguishing the intentional guideposts from the silent chorus of granite is a monumental task. Carnac does not offer a single, dramatic light show like Newgrange. Instead, it presents a vast, open-air puzzle where the intended observational method, if there was one unified method, remains just out of reach. It challenges us to ask, were these rows a colossal calendar, a symbolic representation of a cosmic order, or something else entirely that we have not yet conceived? The debate ensures that Carnac remains a living mystery, its true purpose still guarded by the stones. Far to the south, on the sun-drenched island of Malta, lie the Mnajdra temples, a cluster of limestone structures built over 5,000 years ago. Their astronomical credentials are both more precise and more hotly debated than those at Carnac. The lower temple at Mnajdra is particularly fascinating. Its entrance and internal architecture are exquisitely engineered. On the mornings of the equinoxes, the first rays of the sun pass directly through the main doorway and illuminate a specific stone slab deep within the central apse. The alignment is undeniable and precise, but the temple's relationship with the solstices is where the geometry becomes truly sophisticated. During the summer solstice, A blade of sunlight cuts through the doorway and strikes the edge of a stone orthostat or upright slab to the left of the passage. At the winter solstice, the sunbeam enters through the same doorway but is projected onto a corresponding slab on the right side. This creates a clear three-point calendar in stone, marking the sun's extreme northern and southern journeys and its balanced center. The consensus is strong that this was deliberate. The controversy arises when we ask how it was used. Was Najdra an active observatory where priests tracked the sun's slow crawl along these markers to determine the exact dates for planting and harvest? Or was it primarily a sacred theater, a stage where these solar events were witnessed as powerful demonstrations of divine presence, reinforcing the authority of the temple builders? The evidence supports both interpretations, reminding us that in the ancient world, the practical and the spiritual were not separate categories, but intertwined threads of the same cosmic fabric. Even the most studied monuments on Earth still hold chambers of unanswered questions. Within the Great Pyramid of Giza, two narrow, square shafts, each no wider than a dinner plate, angle upward from the king's chamber deep inside the pyramid's heart. For over a century, these mysterious channels were thought to be merely ventilation shafts, but in the 1960s, an astronomer named Virginia Trimble proposed a revolutionary idea. She suggested that these shafts were not for air but for stars. Her theory, later expanded by others, posited that the southern shaft from the king's chamber was aligned to point toward the belt of Orion, specifically the star Al-Nitak, at the time of the pyramid's construction. The northern shaft, she argued, targeted the circumpolar star Thuban, the North Star of that era. This would have created a direct celestial pathway for the soul of the entombed pharaoh, guiding it to the eternal, imperishable stars. The visual and symbolic correlation is profoundly compelling, weaving astronomy, mythology, and architecture into a single, grand vision of the afterlife. Yet, like the Orion correlation theory for the pyramid's layout, this stellar interpretation faces rigorous scientific scrutiny. Modern calculations accounting for precise precession show that the alignments are close but not perfect. The shafts are not laser straight over their entire length. They have slight bends and deviations, which some argue are construction adjustments, and others see as evidence against precise celestial aiming. Furthermore, similar shafts exist in the Queen's chamber, but these were sealed at both ends, never open to the outside sky, complicating a purely astronomical explanation. The debate over the star shafts exemplifies the ongoing challenge in archaeoastronomy. A beautiful, holistic theory that satisfies our desire for a singular, profound meaning must still withstand the exacting measurements of physics and the messy realities of ancient engineering. It is possible the shafts served a dual purpose, both practical and symbolic, or that their primary function remains something we have not yet considered. These unresolved sites, from the sprawling fields of Karnak to the precise temples of Malta and the hidden channels of Giza, are not failures of the scientific process. They are its lifeblood. They prove that this field is not about closing a book on the past, but about keeping it open, turning its pages with ever more careful hands. Each unexplained alignment is an invitation, a reminder that the conversation between humanity and the cosmos is ancient, ongoing, and still full of wonder waiting to be decoded. These scattered pieces of evidence, from sun daggers to star shafts, form a puzzle. How can we confidently assemble them into a picture of deliberate design rather than a pattern born of chance? Over decades of study, researchers have identified a set of clear hallmarks, a checklist of features that, when they appear together, point strongly toward intentional astronomical embedding. The first and most fundamental is repeated alignment to a single, significant celestial event. A single stone that catches the solstice sunrise could be a fortunate accident. But if that alignment is reinforced, If multiple architectural elements within the same site all point toward that same sunrise, or if the site's primary axis is echoed in secondary features, coincidence becomes an unsatisfying explanation. This redundancy is the bedrock of intent. The second hallmark is the presence of architectural features that serve no obvious purpose other than to enhance or frame the observation. Think of the narrow roof box at Newgrange, a meticulously constructed aperture that channels a single beam of light. Consider the interior corridors of the Great Pyramid, angled with precision toward specific regions of the sky. These are not generic doorways or ventilation shafts. They are specialized instruments made of stone. They are tools engineered to filter the cosmos, turning a broad celestial event into a sharp, readable signal. A simple alignment becomes a compelling argument when the architecture itself is shaped to be the lens. The third indicator is a clear correlation with the culture's own artifacts, myths, and written records. An alignment gains profound meaning when it points to a star or event that we know held deep significance for the people who built it. A temple doorway framing the heliacal rising of Sirius in Egypt is powerful because Egyptian texts explicitly link that star to the Nile's life-giving flood and the god Osiris. The serpent's descent at Chichen Itza resonates because it brings to life the myth of Kukulkan, a deity central to Maya cosmology. When the stone and the story agree, we are no longer imposing a modern interpretation. We are listening to an ancient one. Finally, any proposed astronomical function must be consistent with the known technological toolkit of the culture. It is not enough to say a site aligns with a star. We must also be able to explain, using methods they demonstrably possessed, how they could have achieved that alignment. Could they have used gnomons and horizon markers? Did they have the surveying skills with chords and water levels to translate that observation into construction? A theory that requires a technology or knowledge base for which there is no other evidence strains credibility. The most convincing cases satisfy all these criteria. They show a repeated alignment enhanced by specialized architecture, connected to the culture's own worldview and achievable with the tools at hand. This framework is not about diminishing wonder, it is about deepening understanding. It gives us a disciplined way to listen to the stones, to separate the whispers of true design from the background noise of random possibility. It transforms a site from a collection of mysterious features into a coherent statement, a deliberate sentence written in geometry and light, waiting for the right moment to be read aloud. With this lens in hand, the legacy of these ancient astronomers comes into even sharper focus, revealing not just what they built, but the meticulous, multi-generational process of observation and verification that made such precision possible. That meticulous checklist of intention reveals more than just a method. It reveals a mindset, the patient observation, the rigorous verification, the drive to translate cosmic order into earthly form. These are not merely ancient practices. They are the very bedrock of the scientific method itself, born not in a Renaissance laboratory, but under the open sky of prehistory. The legacy of these ancient astronomers is not locked in their stones alone. It flows directly into the telescope and the satellite. Their work represents the first great human project of data collection. For generations, they gathered empirical evidence, noting the sun's path, charting the moon's wobble, recording the steady drift of stars. They formed hypotheses about celestial cycles and tested them against the horizon year after year. When a prediction failed, when a shadow did not fall where expected, they refined their model. This iterative process of observation, prediction, and correction is the engine of all science. The modern astronomer who calculates the orbit of a distant exoplanet is engaged in the same fundamental dialogue with the cosmos, just with a different set of instruments. The scale has changed from a notch on a hill to a pixel on a charge-coupled device. but the impulse is identical: to measure, to understand, to find pattern in the apparent chaos. These sites are more than historical curiosities. They are the first observatories, the original laboratories where humanity began its conscious, systematic study of the universe. They remind us that science did not spring fully formed from the mind of a single genius in a particular century. It is a slow, collective inheritance, a flame that was kindled by those who first dared to count the days between solstices and mark them in something more permanent than memory. This lineage connects the builder at Newgrange, squinting at a dawn ray, to the team at the Keck Observatory, analyzing the light from a dying star. Both are seeking answers to the oldest questions: where are we, and what is our place in all of this? The ancient approach achieved something modern science often struggles to replicate: a seamless unity of disciplines. In these structures, there was no conflict between the empirical and the spiritual, between art and engineering, or between individual discovery and communal meaning. The pyramid was a resurrection machine, a political statement, an engineering marvel, and a celestial calendar all at once. The descending serpent at Chichen Itza was a public spectacle, a theological lesson, and a precise solar marker. This holistic integration is perhaps their most profound gift to us. In a world where knowledge is increasingly specialized and fragmented, these monuments stand as testament to a different way of knowing. They show that the deepest understanding emerges when we stop compartmentalizing the world, when we allow the measurement of a shadow to also be a prayer, and the carving of a spiral to also be an equation. They achieved a precision that still astonishes us, not by separating themselves from their environment or their beliefs, but by listening to them with profound attention. Their legacy, then, is a dual one. It is the technical foundation of astronomy, the long, patient practice of watching and measuring that taught us the sky has rules. And it is a philosophical challenge, an invitation to remember that our search for cosmic order can also be a search for meaning, that the drive to map the heavens is, at its heart, the human drive to find our home in the vast and beautiful dark. The stones have spoken, and their message is clear. The astronomical precision we find etched into ancient landscapes across the globe was not delivered by outside forces or lost super sciences. It was earned. It was the hard-won product of a universal human formula, a combination of relentless generational observation, elegantly simple tools, embodied geometry, and a cultural drive so profound it could move mountains. From the Gnomon's creeping shadow to the chord-stretched right angle, from the water-leveled plaza to the star-bisected horizon, each method reveals a practical, testable, and brilliant process. This was not magic, but a rigorous, cumulative science of the sky, practiced with a patience that humbles our modern rush. These civilizations, separated by oceans and millennia, independently arrived at similar solutions because they were all solving the same fundamental equation: how to translate the orderly cosmos into the language of their world. The pyramids, the circles, the temples, they are not anomalies or lucky accidents. They are the permanent test scores of ancient intellect, proving a sophistication we are only now fully appreciating. They stand as irrefutable evidence that the drive to measure, to understand, and to find our place in the universe is a defining thread of the human story. This shared heritage invites us to look up and to look back with new respect. It asks us to see these sites not as ruins of a forgotten past, but as active monuments to a conversation that never ended. The next time you see a photo of a solstice alignment, or if you are ever fortunate enough to stand in one of these places, remember the generations of watchers. Remember the hands that stretched the cord and set the stone. You are witnessing one of humanity's first and greatest collective experiments, a legacy written in light and rock, waiting for anyone with curiosity to read its timeless lines.